Hello. I'm going to be reading something from this book here. Truly Scary Stories for Fearless Kids. So, yeah. And we're going to be reading The Monkey's Paw, the first chapter, by W. Jacobs. Right here. And I'll show you the pictures too. Chapter 1. Without the night was cold and wet, but in the small parlor of Lambertium Villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. Father and son were at chess. The former, who possessed ideas about the game involving rational changes, putting his king into such a sharp and unnecessary peril that it even provoked a comment from the white-haired old lady knitting placidly by the fire. "Hark at the wind," said Mr. White, who, having seen a fatal mistake after it was too late, was admirably desirous of preventing his son from seeing it. "I'm listening," said the latter, grimly surveying the board as he stretched out his hand. "Check. I should hardly think that he'd come tonight," said his father, with his hand poised over the board. "Mate," replied the son. "That's the worst of living so far out," baffled Mr. White, with sudden and unlooked-for violence. "Of all the beastly, slushy, out-of-the-way places to live in, this is the worst. Past the bog and the road's a torrent. I don't know what people are thinking about. I suppose because only 2 houses in the road are left, they think it doesn't matter." "Never mind, dear," said his wife smoothly. "Perhaps you'll win the next one." Mr. White looked up sharply, just in time to intercept a knowing glance between mother and son. The words died away on his lips, and he hid a guilty grin in the thin gray beard. "There he is," said Herbert White, as the gate banged loudly and heavy footsteps came towards the door. The old man rose with hospitality haste and opened the door, and was heard consulting with the new arrival. The new arrival also consulted with himself, so that Miss White said "Tough, tough," and coughed gently as her husband entered the room, followed by a tall, billowy man, beady of eye and recusation of vistage. "Senior Major Morris," he said, introducing himself. The sergeant major shook hands, and taking his pre-offered seat by the fire, watched contentedly while his host got out whiskey and tumblers and stood a small copper kettle on the fire. At the third glass, his eyes got brighter, and he began to talk. The little family circle regarded with eager interest this visitor from distant parts, as he squared his broad shoulders in a chair and spoke of the wild scenes and daunting deeds of wars and plagues and strange peoples. 21 years of it," said Mr. White, nodding at his wife and son. "When he went away, he was a sip of a youth in the warehouse. Now look at him." "He don't look to have taken much harm," said Miss White politely. "I'd like to go to India myself," said the old man. "Just to look round a bit, you know." "Better where you are," said the sergeant major, shaking his head. He put down the empty glass, and sighing softly, shook it again. I like to see these old temples and phalanx and jugglers, said the old man. What was that you started telling me the other day about a monkey's paw or something, Morris? Nothing, said the soldier hastily. Leastways nothing worth hearing. Monkey paw, said Miss White curiously. Well, it's just a bit of what you might call magic, perhaps, said the sergeant major offhandedly. His three listeners leaned forward eagerly. The visit absent-mindedly put his empty glass to his lips, and then set it down again. His host filled it for him. To look at it, said the sergeant major, fumbling in his pocket, it's just an ordinary little paw, dried to a mummy. He took something out of his pocket and proffered it. Miss White drew back with a grimace, but her son, taking it, examined it curiously. "And what is there so special about it?" inquired Mr. White, as he took it from his son, and having examined it, placed it upon the table. "It had a spell on it by a fat old Fowler," said the sergeant major, "a very holy man. I wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives, and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow. He put a spell on it, so that the three separate men could each have 3 wishes from it. His manner was so impressive that his hearers were conscious that their light laughter jarred somewhat. "Well, why don't you have 3, sir?" said Herbert White cleverly. The soldier regarded him in the way that the Middle Age is wont to regard presumptuous youth. "I have," he said quietly, and his blotchy face whitened. "And did you really have the 3 wishes granted?" asked Mrs. White. "I did," said the sergeant major, and his glass tapped against his strong teeth. "And has anyone else wished?" persisted the old lady. "The first man had his 3 wishes." "Yes," was the reply. "I don't know what the first 2 were, but the 3rd was for death. That's how I got the paw." His tones were so grave that a hush fell upon the group. "If you had your 3 wishes, it's no good to you now, then, Morris," said the old man at last. "What do you keep it for?" The soldier shook his head. "Fancy, I suppose," he said, slowly. "I did have some idea of selling it, but I don't think I will. It's caused enough mischief already. Besides, people won't buy. They think it's a fairy tale, some of them, and those who do anything of it want to try it first and pay me afterwards." "If you could have another 3 wishes," said the old man, eyeing him keenly, "would you have them?" "I don't know," said the other. "I don't know." He took the paw, and dangling it between his forefinger and thumb, suddenly threw it upon the fire. White, with a slight cry, stooped down and snatched it off. And here's the guy tossing it into the fire. Oops. "Better let it burn," said the soldier solemnly. "If you don't want it, Morris," said the other, "give it to me." "I won't," said his friend doggedly. "I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happened. Pitch it on the fire again like a sensible man." The other shook his head and examined the new possession closely. "How do you do it?" he inquired. "Hold it up with your right hand and wish out loud," said the sergeant major. "But I warn you of the consequences." Sounds like the Arabian Nights, said Mrs. White, as she rose and began to set supper. Don't you think you might wish for 4 pairs of hands for me? Her husband drew the talisman from his pocket, and then all three burst into laughter as the sergeant major, with a look of alarm on his face, caught him by the arm. If you must wish, he said gruffly, wish for something sensible. Mr. White dropped it back into his pocket, and placing chairs, motioned his friend to the table. In the business of supper, the talisman was partly forgotten, and afterwards the three sat listening to an enthralled fashion to a second installment of the soldier's adventures in India. If the tale about the monkey's paw is not more truthful than those he had been telling us, said Herbert, as the door closed behind their guest, just in time to catch the last train, we shan't make much out of it. Did you give him anything for it, father? Inquired Miss White, regarding her husband closely. A trifle, he said, coloring slightly. He didn't want it, but I made him take it, and he pressed me again to throw it away. Likely, said Herbert, with pretended horror. Why, we're going to be rich, and famous, and happy. Wish to be an emperor, father, to begin with. And then you can't be henpecked. He darted around the table, persuaded by the last Mrs. White armed with an anti-massacre. Miss White took the paw from his pocket and eyed it dubiously. I don't know what to wish for, and that's a fact, he said slowly. Seems to me I've got all I want. If you only cleared the house, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you? Said Herbert, with his hands on his shoulder. Well, wish for 200 pounds then. That'll do it. His father smiled shamefacedly at his own cruelty, held up the talisman as his son, with a solemn face, somewhat marred by a wink of his mother, sat down at the piano and struck a few impressive chords. I wish for 200 pounds. Said the old man distinctively. A fine crash from the piano greeted the words, interrupted by a shuddering cry from the old man. The wife and son ran towards him. "And move!" he cried, with a glance of disgust at the object as it lay on the floor. As I wished to twist it in my hand like a snake. Well, I don't see the money, said the son, as he picked it up and placed it on the table. And I bet I never shall. It must have been your fancy, father, said his wife, regarding him anxiously. He shook his head. Never mind, though. There's no harm done. But it gave me a shock all the same. They sat down by the fire again, where the two men finished their pipes. Outside, the wind was higher than ever, and the old man started nervously at the sound of the door banging upstairs. A silence unusual and depressing settled upon all three, which lasted until the old couple rose to retire for the night. I expect you'll find the cash tied up in a big bag in the middle of your bed, said Herbert, as he bade them good night. And something horrible squatting up on top of the wardrobe, watching you as your pocket got ill-gotten gains. He sat alone in the darkness, gazing at the dying fire and seeing faces in it. The last face was so horrible and so timid that he gazed at it in amazement. It got so vivid